I think I joined the Bitcoin subreddit when there was around 200 users, and at that point I bought my first ones via PayPal. You could buy 40 Bitcoin a month, I think, and they were about 80 cents. Then they cut that off with the charge.
Wait, so
yeah.
What 80 cents? Like, when exactly was that? What year was that?
I think around April or May 2011. So it had already pumped up once, I think, to around $2, and then it had crashed down a little bit, and it was around 80 cents.
Everyone must have said it was a scam when it crashed from $2 to 80 cents.
Yeah. Hello, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Proof of Claim podcast. I'm Todd Price, and I'm joined here with my co-host Anil Bharrat. And we're super excited to start this journey with you guys to bring a greater standard of accountability, truth, and transparency to blockchain and the Web3 industry.
Yeah, so if you're listening to this podcast and you're wondering if this is for you, then I'll try to describe exactly the type of people that this podcast would be most relevant for. So if you're a builder of any kind, like a web developer, app developer, full stack, software engineer, IT, networking professional, then this is definitely for you. If you're a B2B salesperson, a blockchain spokesperson or influencer, or even a blockchain supporter, or even like an academic type, then yes, this is definitely for you if you're interested in blockchain and Web3 technology. And then finally, if you're a visionary entrepreneur, somebody that wants to build a business using blockchain technology, or if you have a business and you're curious, like how could you actually integrate Web3 and blockchain technology into your business, then definitely this podcast is for you. I just want to start out by giving a small disclaimer that Todd and I, we're not professional broadcasters, so we may make mistakes here and there, but we're definitely enthusiastic about blockchain and Web3 technology. So what we want to do is just give a quick little background of ourselves, how we met, and why we wanted to actually start this podcast. So Todd, why don't you give a quick background of yourself and tell us a little bit about your personal Bitcoin story and how you got into Bitcoin in the first place.
Sure. I don't come from a formal background in computer science. I studied medical science and neuroscience at university, and then I worked for a few years as a casual academic and in the mortuary there, producing specimens for people to learn, the body's anatomy and how the brain's structured. And around that time, I was, an avid user of Reddit in its semi-early days, and I subscribed to programming and saw a post come up about an ex-Google developer building a Bitcoin client, and what's Bitcoin, and checked it out. So that was in April 2011, I think, and I read the white paper, and then I sort of did a research around the internet. What could I find out about it? I think I joined the Bitcoin subreddit when there was around 200 users, and at that point I bought my first ones via PayPal. You could buy 40 Bitcoin a month, I think, and they were about 80 cents. Then they cut that off with the charge.
What 80 cents? Like, when exactly was that? What year was that?
I think around April or May 2011. So it had already pumped up once, I think, to around $2, and then it had crashed down a little bit, and it was around 80 cents.
Everyone must have said it was a scam when it crashed from $2 to 80 cents.
Yeah, people were like, "Don't buy now. It's just pumped," and then they cut that off, and the next ones I got were through a Second Life exchange. So I had to buy Lindens, and then I swapped to the Lindens for Bitcoin and copped about 15% in fees or something, or in the spread. And then then that was sort of too expensive. So then the next one's Mt. Gox popped up, and I just randomly trusted their instructions and sent some money to a BSB, an account number in Australia, and trusted that in a few days' time the money would show up on a Japanese trading card game exchange, and it did. So yeah, I sort of bought on that during that time, I'd watched it go up to $30, and I was going, "How do I get more of these? It's gonna go, it's gonna go." And yeah. Then I bought on the way back down, but I chickened out once it got to around $2 and stayed there for 18 months, and kind of wishing now I just backed the truck up.
Oh my God! Just imagine, like, God, I can't even think of that. 80 cents, $2, and just imagine if you just forgot about it and then happened to, find it like 15 years later. So like back then when you bought it, how much total Bitcoin do you think you had then?
I think I would have had a few, 500 or 600, I think, was the sort of the amount that they ended up at my top time. Yeah. And yeah. But I couldn't. There's no way that I was going to just put it away and forget about it, because I haven't been able to forget about it since then. It's kind of all I've thought about, and not just for the money side of it, but for the technology.
Well, that's a good question. Like, that I'm curious to know. Like, what is it aside from, like, obviously, there's price is a big thing when it comes to any subject around Bitcoin. But like outside of price, what would you say is the thing that kind of like keeps you going and keeps you interested in, like, what drives your interest and passion around Bitcoin now?
So originally I found it, and I was interested in it as a new form of money that was more frictionless, supported the micropayments, but really in the sociological side and the changes that would come about if we embrace this technology, and the way that we could create distributed workflows to connect with one another, to verify the integrity of documents. And I didn't, at that point, I knew that was possible just from reading the comments and such, and what a hash did in its essence and such. So I was just looking forward to the world that would come about through the embracing of a peer-to-peer electronic cash system and a data integrity layer. And that's, I've heard it said that 16% of all value that is created is lost to the inefficiencies around fraud and bad data and acting on bad data. And if this system can bring that down by an order of magnitude and reduce it to 1.5%, then that's just a massive amount of year-on-year economic growth, or more value going back to everyone. And that's what I'm passionate about, is just people getting more of from what they've created, and a fairer world.
So going back, I want to circle back to your background, because like more recently, I think you were actually involved in the education side when it comes to like Bitcoin Association, BSBA Association. So what did you do there, and like what exactly? What was like the things that you were covering in terms of the content that you were teaching?
Yeah, sure. So I was taking some courses through the academy, and saw a career opportunity there. They were looking for a curriculum specialist, and because of my background in education at university, I applied, and surprisingly they're like, "You're perfect." And so I joined and I authored the Introduction to Hash Functions as part of the Bitcoin Primitives series. So there was 3 courses that were created: Merkle trees, digital signatures, and hash functions. Because if you understand those 3 components, you can really just build up the whole system from those first primitives. And then there was a range of other courses that were being produced by the academy. At that point, I came on and I was the least technical, but probably with the most formal background in education. But then the talent in the team got poached off, and Connor went to head stewardship. Brennan, at some point, he was working with more of the node architecture and some of that documentation and the testing of the protocol. Jake Jones went off into formally defined the scope of the new iteration of Terranode, and he's leading the charge with IPv6 integration and such like that. So I've taught a variety of different audiences, sort of university students in Karachi, developers in Uganda, going through sort of a boot camp. I've delivered training and sessions to the SEC and central bank in the Philippines. I wrote an elective for a master's cohort there in IT, blockchain for digital transformation. Written training that's gone out to 30,000 Nigerians under their national projects. So it's I guess developed a pretty robust set of I guess analogs and educational devices to communicate these ideas to anyone. And in that experience, I've met some really fascinating people and world-class builders in this space that are building really meaningful solutions. And just finding that I'm able to meet them on the level and hear what they're doing, what their enterprise architecture is, what their requirements are, and them valuing my intelligence and what I have to offer there. So recognizing, okay, this is highly sought after in the space, but there's a lot of noise. So trying to get myself out there to let people know what I can offer them and differentiate myself in a noisy market. But what about you?
Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about your background and your Bitcoin story.
Well, so my background is quite diverse. And I would say, my after leaving university, I would say my first kind of 5 years of my early 20s would be in direct sales. And I was very much an introvert, and direct sales kind of forced me to learn how to be a little bit more extrovert, which was actually a very useful skill to learn. So I'm still definitely introvert, but when I need to, I can kind of be extrovert. And so that's definitely something that I've valued. But from there, I did a little bit of small business. So I had my own local window cleaning business, did a little bit of Airbnb for a little time. But it wasn't until late 2019, 2020 is when I started getting into the advertising space. And so for the past 4 or 5 years or so now, I've been kind of officially sort of a media buyer is the term. So somebody that manages ad campaigns for various businesses. So it could be local businesses, it could be coaches, consultants that are selling sort of higher ticket programs. It could be e-commerce companies. So I've done a wide range of different campaigns that I've managed. But yeah, that's kind of sort of my background is a combination of sales, a little bit of small business, and advertising. When I first heard about Bitcoin, it was actually at the end, or I should say the top of the 2017 bull run. And the funny thing is, I didn't hear about Bitcoin from a friend of mine or a brother or something. I heard it from my dad, of all people. And my dad was I don't know, he must have been at the times, I don't know, 60-ish or so. And he heard about it because one of his friends, probably 3 months earlier, so this would have been around August or September, October, September of 2017. So that peak bull run. They invested a little bit back then. I don't know what the price would have been in August, September. Maybe it was around still low, the 1,000 to 3,000 mark around then. And in that 3-month period that they had invested, they went up. Their portfolio must have grew to 30K. So that got my dad really excited. And at the time, he was thinking about buying a house, putting money down to buy a new investment property. And then instead, he's instead, I just want to hold Bitcoin. So that was his thing. And at the same time, he was asking us, I have 3 older brothers, so he was asking us to what is this Bitcoin? He actually wanted to give us a little bit of seed capital to invest ourselves, so we can kind of spread his risk across all of his sons. So that was sort of my first what is Bitcoin? And I had to basically learn about it as quickly as possible, so that I could help protect my dad from not potentially getting scammed, which is, despite having all 4 of his sons involved in this, we still have two separate scenarios where he has trusted another company to give him their Bitcoin so they could return more Bitcoin to him, and it both times did not work out. And I'm just like kicking myself for like how the saying goes, right? Fool me once, shame on me, but fool me twice. Or whatever the saying is, like it's just you can't get fooled at the same time 2 times in a row. So
well, I
that's
haven't been fooled at the same time, but I've been fooled many times. And
yeah.
while I may have had 500 or 600 to start with, I no longer have any Bitcoin. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
but you learn through these mistakes, and you learn that the companies that are offering to pay dividends for their mining rewards, why don't they just keep the money for themselves rather than give them to you? And you learn the seed venture that's saying they're going to that's run out of a dodgy Panamanian exchange that's going to buy property, and then you get dividends on the rental properties. That they might not be the most accountable individuals, and so I've made a lot of mistakes in here, but that's where you learn from the mistakes, and then you can hopefully people want to appreciate your expertise. But I've found still when people come and tell me the next yield or the next operation that's going to give a passive income to them out of the crypto space, and I say, well, every time when I did that, I lost money, and then when I told other people that they did that's what's going to happen, they said I'm wrong, and then 2 years later they lost money. But if you want to say this time's different, then go ahead. But I would hazard, especially if you've made some money out of it, I would say that now's a good time to quit while you're ahead. But people don't want to hear that.
Well, it's mainstream, right? Like that's the mainstream narrative right now. With well, let me ask you this, because like there's lots of words, there's lots of narratives going around. Let's define some basic terminology here so we can like kind of get on a level playing field, because this is like really important to understand the same terminology, that we're speaking the same language. So how would you define, like there's a few different terms that almost sound the same when you think about it, right? There's blockchain, there's Web3, there's distributed ledger technology, there's Bitcoin. So how would you define, let's say, blockchain? And maybe we'll go down the list and go one at a time, and you can kind of like start to differentiate blockchain from Bitcoin, from Web3, distributed ledger. Are they all one and the same, or are they different? How would
No, they're different. Yeah. So probably the broadest term there would be the distributed ledger technology, and it's not exclusive to Bitcoin or blockchain. It existed beforehand, and ways for distributing a ledger between multiple people, and how can you sort of all write to that ledger and guarantee on the consistency of the records, or if you can guarantee on the consistency of the records, how can you make sure that you get a good available response? Because if people are writing from different things, you can't always give the accurate record. So that was that's been around for decades, as long as distributed systems really have been. And then blockchain was really it came into prominence with Bitcoin, but there may have been other sort of systems that tried to use like a hash-based chain of hash dependencies, so that the next block depends on it, or the next entry record has a requirement of a value from the previous entry, so it kind of links them together as you build on. But then Bitcoin was the first progenitor to sort of bring the blockchain into the public vernacular. And so I would say a blockchain is a public ledger, or a public network, a distributed ledger that's published in public, and it's permissionless, so anyone can join or leave. And what it does is it batches events into a block, and has a process by which the independent parties that are all participating in that network can agree on this state and the truthfulness or the validity of the records, and then it binds those through a hash-based dependency into another set of records. So it's sort of doing this batch processing for settlement and moving the chain along. So it's kind of been a heavily marketed term, and then there's a whole lot of adjacent systems that have come out. Some of them have leveraged blockchain to say, oh yeah, we're a private blockchain. They don't really have those same properties. others have jumped on the back and said, oh, we're not blockchain, we're a distributed ledger technology, of which that's not actually that revolutionary because the technology's been around for a long period of time. So like Hedera Hashgraph, they would say, oh, we're not a blockchain, we're a distributed ledger technology and we use similar principles. So there's, and then Web3, I would say, is a continuation of, if we said Web 1 was a read internet, people had a server and they would publish a thing and you would go there and you would read it. Then Web 2 was read and write. So I'm able to blog and make entries and such like that. Where then Web 3, I would say, is read, write, and own, where you have the capacity to, so you own what you've created in there, and you have the capacity to like voluntarily take that content, that idea, that data to market and bind it into sort of self-executing agreements, trade it for micro payments, revoke permissions, selectively disclose values and things like that. So it gives you a whole lot, another dimension to that read and write sort of framework that was conventional for Web 2.
Okay, so blockchain is different than distributed ledger technology, right? And
it's a subset of distributed ledger technology.
So the broadest term is distributed ledger technology. The subset that is next broadest would be what, Web3 blockchain, Web3 or blockchain?
Well, Web3 is, people wouldn't say that it's necessarily blockchain, though, like it is. I think blockchain's an intrinsic part of it. So, or probably actually Web3 would be even broader than distributed ledger technology in a sense, because it's kind of encapsulating a new web, a new paradigm of the web. Distributed ledger technology is a technology that allows this new paradigm of the web to record activities and reference that in a ledger, balances or whatever, a system of account. Then blockchain is a subset of those of distributed ledgers, and then Bitcoin is a subset of blockchain. And not all blockchains are equal, and so that term needs to be kind of clarified and robustly defined. And then similarly, later in this episode, I think we're maybe going to get into actually trying to define what constitutes Bitcoin as a particular blockchain and as a protocol. But I guess before we go into that part of it, maybe we can talk about what the nature of this podcast is and how we met and what our background there. So I'll leave that to you because you initiated the conversation.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny because this kind of gets into sort of like why I wanted to even start this podcast in the first place, because well, it's interesting. Like, I initially got interested in Bitcoin because of sort of the mainstream narrative that it was like this alternative system to the traditional financial system. And so that idea was interesting. I was like a gold bug silver type of person. Like I like that alternative, like hedge against inflation and also a hedge against the typical financial products that are out there. But after I kind of got deeper into let's just say this: after the bull market went away and we got into that bear market. Remember, I got in at the top of the bull market. I was left watching that portfolio go down 80%, even though it wasn't a big portfolio, but still, I seen it go down 80%. And then I was like, well, I still believe in the narrative, and I still believe in what it stands for. And it was funny because it was in the bear market is when I decided to do more research as to what it is that I'm actually holding. So maybe that's a common theme for most people that have experienced their first or second bear market, but at least that's what happened with me. And from there, I that's how I went down this sort of rabbit hole of who is asking these questions, like who is Satoshi Nakamoto, what is Bitcoin, and how does it actually work? And that's when I started to hear other creators and influencers in the blockchain and Bitcoin space. And so I started following them for their content. Eventually, after like years of doing that, I started to feel like there wasn't much new content being created. There's a couple things that happened. One is some of the kind of staple creators that were, on YouTube and X and whatnot, they basically went away. Like they just no longer, they quit or they went away for whatever the reason is. I don't know. But so a lot of those like creators, Joshua Hensley was one of them, at least in the BSV space. There was another guy, I keep messing up his name, but I mix it up with an X-Men
Ryan X Child.
character. Ryan X Child. Xavier, I want to say. I keep wanting to say Xavier.
Professor X.
Yes, exactly. So he was one as well, but then he eventually dipped out as well. And so like I was at this point where I was like not really finding a lot of good content that went deep. There were still people out there that did content, but not necessarily going in deep. And I wanted to learn a little bit more about like the actual mechanics of Bitcoin. So somehow, I don't know how, but somehow like my LinkedIn feed started to get a little bit more involved with like people, talking about Bitcoin and Web3 stuff. And eventually I came across you on LinkedIn, and some of your posts was like quite, I don't know if confrontational is the right way or divisive is the right way, but like it really grabbed my attention. And
contrarian, maybe.
Contrarian, that's the right word, is contrarian, right? So it grabbed my attention in that way. And it was also interesting because it was detailed and it talked about like under the hood of how things worked. And that's basically what I was looking for. So I just started engaging with, liking your stuff initially. And then I think I might have commented here and there. And then eventually, like one of the things that, for me that I'm at right now with like this whole Bitcoin and blockchain space is that I'm not a developer, right? I'm more of like the marketer, the salesperson type of person. So a big thing that I hear a lot in the BSV space is that, build, like just build, right? I'm just not a developer. So, there is vibe coding and whatnot, but I just don't trust like whatever the hell I would vibe code. Like, I've even played around with it and I've prompted a website and I've prompted an application, but like, do I trust to actually use that solution in a real live environment and like charge customers for that solution? I don't trust that. And I almost feel it's irresponsible of me to like build something that I have no way of quality controlling or quality, checking for bugs or anything like that. So I can't really like see myself being a developer from that perspective unless I start to build the actual building blocks and like the real hard skills of development. So anyways, like what I was looking for was somebody like you to like essentially somebody that has the technical knowledge that I could like partner with, that I could help, get to the forefront and basically help market that person. And so essentially that's kind of why I reached out to you in the first place. And that's sort of the conversation that we engaged in. And I think eventually we kind of went back and forth, and I just like hit you up finally one day. I was like, hey man, what do you need to get started in this, that, and the other? And we started this idea of starting this podcast. So that's kind of how, we started it. And yeah, that's my side of the story. So what would you say is your side?
Yeah, I think I had been pretty dormant on LinkedIn, and then all of a sudden how do I use this to grow a business? Like there are methods. I took Justin Welch's LinkedIn operating system where it said you can make a living, create a business as a content creator on LinkedIn, and what's your sub niche? And following all my expertise, I'm like, well, I can talk about blockchain like nobody else, or like very few people, I guess. And I love talking about it. And there's a whole lot of people that talk about it that have no idea, and I'm constantly shouting at my screen, oh, that's wrong. So it seemed like a perfect fit to come out and, make a business around that, sort of saying what's going on, what people are, where people are making their mistakes. And then as I started looking at it, I'm going, oh wow, there's a giant graveyard of failed blockchain projects. There's a whole bunch of like teetering towers that look to be doomed, and when you analyze what are the patterns and the builds and the architectures that all these old ones were using, all the new builds that are coming to replace that or be the next revolution, they're all exhibiting the same patterns and architectures. So you go, oh wow, people really have no idea how to make informed decisions in this space, and they have no idea of the risk they're facing. So that's been my positioning on LinkedIn, is blockchain risk specialist, helping people understand architectural determinism, why their build may be doomed from the start, why what their exposure is to other risks, patent risk, governance risk, how like dependent are they on the smart contracts and bridges and things like that. So just trying to quantify all that, and I guess that sort of ties in. So in that connection and that outreach, I've been developing a bit of a working relationship with a professional engineer by the name of Dan Robles, and he's for 30 years been trying to work on the idea of transferable expertise. He was in part of the team or whatever who delivered the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and he was trying to get mutual recognition for engineers to be able to move freely between the countries and get equivalency in the accreditations so that they could work in different industries, but then realizing that it's a mess there. So he's been working for at least since 2015 or so on trying to create tangible assets out of intangible assets, and that's in the form of claims and validations, because when you realize that the whole world really runs on capitalism, but capitalism is essentially a casino, and people will throw money at a bet if they know the odds of the bet. And the way to know the odds of the bet is to look at who's making the claims and look at their reputation. And his pitch really is that engineers are the first ones that measure risk into existence, sort of give you the framework, the constraints of physics, the constraints of flow rates and whatever else, as to what performance they can give, what security they can give, what a building's foundation, what's a bridge rated to, all these things. And then it's through that that quantification of risk that capital can flow. So I'd been introduced to that 3 or 4 years ago, and had used his work in some of my courses, and it's been stuff I've been chewing on. So I was really happy when he returned comments in our discussions, and we've been working to try to think of how to prototype this process using a blockchain system to enhance that capacity. And so that's been really running through my mind a lot. And when we said let's start a podcast, and I'm going, a podcast on risk assessment, like really? That's
yeah.
When anyone hears risk assessment, usually I'm just thinking about it back in the days when I worked in the lab, and it's like a risk assessment. You read the MSDS for handling your chemical, put your PPE on, and you'd like eyes just glaze over. So I'm like, I don't want to make a podcast around that. I want to make it around the actual nature of what I've been talking about with Dan, which is that claims and validations, and just trying to create a fun environment that we can suss out the mechanics of how people want to make claims, how they can even reduce their claims back to a distillable sentence of what do you claim that you can do. Like I've got a bunch of claims I can make, but in the context of this show, the claim that I want to demonstrate through my this show is going to be a corpus that we're going to it'll be weekly releases. So that's going to form a body, which is my proof of work, that I believe the proof of work shall be, demonstrate my capacity. And the claim that I want to make is that I help executives, tech founders, and blockchain developers de-risk their Web3 initiatives and avoid that crypto graveyard that I spoke about. So hopefully over the course of the show, I can show you that I have more than enough capability to do that, and really challenge the listeners to think deeper about some of these concepts and to empower them to be able to advance arguments and positions that are grounded in reality rather than the marketing bollocks.
Yeah, well,
what about you?
You have what about me?
Do you have a particular claim that you want to stand by for this show that you're going to demonstrate?
Oh, okay. I would say that I would say that, from my perspective as being somebody that is more of like, on the marketing side and the sales side of things, my claim would be kind of the same in that, like, I'll call it the Web 2 world. Like, what I typically do with clients is I help clients, like coaches specifically, consultants, creators, build like their customer acquisition systems and the revenue systems. So that could be a lead generation thing if it's a B2B side, or it could be an e-commerce system where you're actually getting like sales directly, if it's like B2C side. So I would say my claim is I could apply that methodology for people in the blockchain space, and that's kind of like what we're doing together now is applying. I guess I have this ability to sort of like help people simplify their messaging in a way that they get clear on what it is, who it is they serve, what it is that they offer, and their unique selling proposition, and then basically how to package that and how to present that. So that would be sort of my claim, is that I can help consultants and those type of people package and position their knowledge in a way where they can build their own customer acquisition systems and revenue systems. That would be my claim.
Yeah. Well, I think you're doing well on that.
I appreciate it. So let me ask you this. Like, I really like the name that you came up with. We were actually brainstorming some names for the podcast, and I can't even remember some of the names that I came up with. But initially, when you said proof of claim, I was like, it's okay. But then when we started to talk about like, the some of the ideas that you had, there were some ideas that you explored and you shared with me that I was kind of like new to the terminology, and I wanted you to cover some of those because it kind of like really builds up, and it's the reason why the name proof of claim really kind of like grew on me as the days went on. And one of the things that you shared with me is like the term is called epistemology. I don't know if I said that right, but could you explain what that is and how that kind of like builds into this thesis? I don't know, ethos of this podcast.
Well, I'm probably going to butcher it because it's a term from philosophy, but it's got the ology end to it. So it's the study of, and it's the study of how we come to build knowledge. Really, it's the systems that a framework for determining what is true, what is whether something is true just to one person or it's true to everyone, what is actually the nature of claims and their veracity, the differentiation between beliefs and verifiable facts. So it's there's a whole school of philosophy of knowledge. You can take electives of that at university, but it teaches you that there's more to it than simply like true or false, or it's about the context. It's about unpacking the way the claim's being made, the way that the logic that's embedded in the claim, the persuasive techniques and the rhetorical devices that are being used in there. So something that I was introduced to decade or so ago was when we were trying to, as a distributed group of a few people online, we're trying to find a way to scrutinize new information that was coming through, and a lot of it was, in the conspiracy world or something like that, and try to cut through it and see what was true and what wasn't. And someone put forward the Trivium method. So there's the Trivium, which is, there's 3 sort of dimensions to it, and there's the Quadrivium, and together they formed the foundational divisions for the 7 liberal arts. And they come back from Plato and Pythagoras. They're ancient Greek sort of framework for analyzing information. So I thought, I wouldn't be, I know a lot about blockchain, I know a lot about a few things, and I'm aware of these concepts enough to recognize that there's formal frameworks for evaluating claims and, cutting through and deciphering what's actually being said. So I'm hoping that even before we get into, inviting people on here that want to prove their claims, from being a blockchain builder or, a particular project or something like that, I've got a few guests planned for this podcast that I'm hoping can really help to shed some more light on that. So I want to get Dan on here because of his work in this whole notion of what constitutes a claim. How can the claim be reduced down to its sort of fundamental mechanics? I've got another professor of sociology that I'd love to have on as a guest, and he's been working on, creating games to achieve a consensus that allows people to sort of, distill, we've got a minimum viable consensus, he calls it. There's other sort of academics that are coming from philosophy and identity and some of these foundational concepts, which we really need to ground ourselves in before we, and show that we've done sort of our due diligence into what it actually means to validate knowledge. What are the limitations? What are some methods? So with the Trivium, it's called the 3 roads, and it looks at the grammar, so the understanding the structure, meaning, and the correct usage of language, the logic, so the reasoning, the inference, and the putting those words together and inferring truth from falsehood, and then the rhetoric, so it's the persuasive communication and the ability to express reason effectively. The Quadrivium is it's sort of useful for mathematical and scientific disciplines, so I'm probably less practiced in even thinking about that. I do naturally, but it covers arithmetic, which is number itself, geometry, which is number in space, music, which is number in time, so harmonics and the rate of change of those, geometry, and astronomy, which is number in space and time. So they're if you went to university in the medieval times, this is the sort of stuff that you would learn. And that's why degrees took 10 years and you came out and you were actually a doctor of thinking, not just like, I've been industry sponsored by so and so to produce a paper that they liked, and now I'm a doctor of philosophy as well. Like, these guys were legit thinkers.
Nice. So I came across a post on X, I think it was, and it was from Craig Wright, and it was interesting because he goes under the account, what do you call it? C.A.R.S.
Tominaga.
Tominaga, yeah. So anyways, I wanted to go through this one thing here, so I just kind of like copied it and put it on a doc here. So I'm gonna kind of read through it and ask you some of the questions to like break it down, so we can kind of use this as our like first sort of proof of claim, if you will, segment, or yeah, I don't know. Like, normally we'll bring on a guest, but since it's just us, we'll use this as the first one. So basically, yeah. So what he says on X is, I'll just read it out here. So it's like, quote, what makes BSV Bitcoin isn't marketing, sentiment, or ticker symbols. It's adherence to the original system defined by the protocol itself. Bitcoin is and always has been the set of rules that define the creation and validation and transactions within the longest chain of proof of work signatures that follow those rules without alteration. So he goes on to like break down 3 pillars of what makes Bitcoin. But so before we get into that, I just want to start to like pick that apart, because let's just see here. So Bitcoin is and always has been the set of rules that define the creation and validation of transactions within the longest chain of proof of work signatures that follow those rules without alteration. So my question to you is this, and I feel like, there's a website that can really clarify my question here. I think it's something with coin in it. Let's see if I can pull it up. Yeah, coin.dance. Yeah, coin.dance. So they have this chart on that website. It's called Bitcoin Proof of Work by Network since August 1st, 2017. So if I click into that, like I know I'm not sharing my screen or anything, but it's quite a very simple chart, right? It's literally 4 chains, Bitcoin chains. You got Bitcoin, which I presume to be BTC. You got, and that's colored gold. Then you've got, which is kind of ironic, but then you've got Bitcoin Cash, right, is colored green. You've got eCash, and then you've got Bitcoin SV, which is colored red. eCash is colored blue. Now, if you look at all of them side by side, all these other chains like Bitcoin Cash, eCash, and BSV, they're like basically like a sliver, right? And then you look at Bitcoin BTC, it's from bottom to top, full bar. It's got the proof of work, like it says 73 RH. What does that even mean, RH? Something about hashes? It's a measurement of hashes or something?
Yeah, I don't know what the next acronym, exapeta, tera,
yeah,
exapeta, something like that.
So RH must be like that next level of hashing. So it's like from the ground, from the 0 to all the way up to 73. So it takes up the entire scale of the chart, and then all the other chains are like slivers, right? They're absolutely like 0. So my question to you is, based on this chart, wouldn't you deduce that Bitcoin BTC is, let's go back to that quote here, is Bitcoin, and it's always been, and then here it says Bitcoin is and always has been the set of rules that define the creation, validation of transactions with the longest chain of proof of work signatures that follow those rules. So why? So the claim here is, his claim is that Bitcoin, BSV is Bitcoin, not because of marketing sentiment, blah, 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 but because of all this. But if you look at the chart on CoinDance, you see that the proof of work the most proof of work is on the BTC chain. So my question is, let's break down his claim, right? Like, how does he claim that BSV? How is it possible that he could claim that BSV is Bitcoin versus BTC if the proof of work has, the longest chain of proof of work is on BTC? How would you break that down?
Okay, so what makes BSV Bitcoin isn't marketing, sentiment, or ticker symbols. Okay, it's adherence to the original system defined by the protocol itself. So it's adhering to the protocol. That's what makes it Bitcoin. So we say, what is a protocol? So if you look at the formal definition in computer science, a protocol is a fixed set of data structures and formats. So it allows different systems to communicate because they have a fixed set of data structures and formats. Because computer systems, if you get one bit off, it can throw the whole system out. These fixed data structures and formats are sort of declared to be snapshot as different schema. That would be the sort of the internal fields of a particular format or something, or then the version itself if they're changing things around. So these protocols are schemed and versioned, because if you want to recreate the capacity to talk in the same way that you did before, you need to make sure you're doing it through the same set of rules for the channel, or else the 70 bytes that come through first are going to be chopped in a different way, because all these these transmissions are just serialized strings of bytes. So you're not getting an image with things put into different parts of a UI. It's just a string, and in that string are like declarations by it itself that say, slice off the first 32, slice off this, that. That's what the protocol is. It's telling you how to slice those off and reconstruct meaningful data structures about what that means. And so in order to do that, those data structures need to be fixed. And so what he says, it's adherence to the original system defined by the protocol itself. Bitcoin is and always has been the set of rules that define the creation and validation of transactions. So there's a set of rules, and that's the particular data structure of the transaction. It starts with the version number, then it has the input count, which will be a variable integer. How many inputs does it have? Then with each input itself, it says, where's this input being spent from, which is the transaction ID of it? What's the version, that the index that it's coming from, the V out it's called. So which order of it, which number of its outputs was this particular one that you're spending in, and then a script that satisfies the locking conditions that were put on that output when it was created. So that's a fixed structure that follows that, and then you have the outputs counter. The outputs follow a particular structure where they'll specify the lock script. And so the way that the node will interpret a random string of characters, if you look at the raw hexadecimal characters of a Bitcoin transaction, it's just C3, A, B, E, F, 2, O. There's nowhere where it has like slices that say this is the first part, that's that. It's because the protocol tells it how to decode that transaction. So we're saying that then the transaction creation and the format for it is fixed, and then similarly the validation of the transaction needs to be under those fixed terms. And so under those fixed terms, it would expect there to be the unlock script in that relative position within those raw bytes of the transaction. What he's saying here is that other systems changed that data structure. They changed it so that at the position where you would normally expect to find the signature, you no longer find the signature. You find a hash or a script hash, and it points to where the signature now lies in a separate data structure. And so that is what happens there.
I was just going to say,
sorry, go.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, because you're actually kind of getting into some of the details that actually break into how he breaks down the three pillars. So maybe I'll just continue to read that, and you can kind of like go off of that. So, and also maybe I think you had mentioned to me at one point something about this last piece, which is the longest chain of proof of work signatures that follow those rules without alteration. So I think that might be like that actual key piece, right? But let me go through the first part of the three pillars that make BSV Bitcoin. The first part he calls is protocol immutability. And so you're actually starting to talk a lot about these details, these finer details. The rules that define Bitcoin are transaction format, scripting language, block structure, and economic incentives. These are fixed, right? If you alter these, you create a new system. So BSV is according to him, he's saying BSV alone preserves that original rule set. So how can you explain how like BTC perhaps, or BCH even, eCash, are not following these transaction formats, these scripting languages, this block structure? Is there anything that you can point to that can legitimately say like, yeah, that's changed, the block structure has changed, the transaction format has changed in BTC, BCH, or what is the other ticker symbol for eCash? Is it XBT? Is it, or is it
XEC? XEC, isn't it?
I can't remember. I'll look that up. But
I
yeah,
think
I'll look that up.
But maybe before I jump in there, so when we're talking about at that top one, it says the set of rules and define the creation and validation of transactions within the longest chain of proof of work signatures. Yeah. So in the white paper, one of the first sentences, we define a coin as a chain of digital signatures. So the chain of digital signatures is that because of the data structure I was talking about with version, input count, then the particular values of the input, all of that wire format is then hashed. So the raw bytes of the transaction are hashed to form the transaction ID. And then that transaction ID is the reference that is used as a pointer to say, oh, this previous transaction ID and this third output from that transaction is the input that we're spending here, we're submitting here. So there's a dependency on the signature data being part of the raw data that's hashed to form the transaction ID. And that forms the chain because it's the values that were input into this one are then used, and when it's hashed, the digest of the next one contains an input as part of the pre-image, which is that signature. When you decouple that and you move the signature data somewhere else, you're no longer creating the transaction ID with the signature. So it's no longer the chain of digital signatures. It's a chain of transactions. And in those transactions is a script. And in that script is a suggestion that the signature has been validated and it's stored in a separate data structure, but it's not the same as being able to instantly invoke, I guess, the way to validate that signature to the nodes. There's a specialized rule set that's changed the way a node will validate a transaction, and that would be with the SegWit nodes. So if we move to the protocol immutability, that's what he's saying is the transaction format is fixed, the scripting language is fixed. You can't introduce no opcodes into that. If you start to disable some of the legacy opcodes, you're starting to actually censor transactions. If a transaction was generated under the full set of opcodes and now you've taken one away, you're now restricting the capacity for that type of transaction to be executed on the chain. The block structure is something else. Yeah. So the block structure has the header, it has a little value which says how many transactions are in the block, and then it has all of those transactions serialized. But with SegWit, what it introduced was another data structure that's embedded in the Coinbase transaction. So that's the first transaction that a miner rewards themselves the fees via. And in their output, they can put a particular data payload, and that data payload is another Merkle tree that's created from the particular witness scripts for all the transactions that are included in that block. And it was created under the suggestion that by moving the witness data away from the transactions and moving it to there, that it somehow conferred scalability. But I'm yet to see how that claim actually holds water.
Was it scalability or was it security? Because the premise of SegWit was implemented. Yeah, it was implemented because of this idea of
transaction malleability.
That one, right? So okay, so let me ask you this: by removing the signature from, what did you say? There's the header, there's the block with the transaction, and then the bottom. What is that bottom section called? Is it just the signature, or is there a bottom? Am I not saying that correctly?
Sorry, can you ask that again?
Yeah. So the block structure itself is a header, a body
a
block
number that says
section.
how many there are, and that's all the block is itself is the header, which has version, the previous block, the Merkle root, the timestamp, the difficulty, and I don't know. There's it's 80 byte header.
Right,
Then
okay.
it's just all the transactions serialized after that.
Yeah, and then is it and then the signature, I guess, or the is that
that's
at
in a
the end of?
transaction itself. That's in a transaction itself.
I
So
see.
a block consists of a bunch of transactions, and a transaction on average is sort of 220 bytes. The first 4 bytes of the version, then an input counter, so that's usually 1 byte. Then the previous transaction ID, that's 32 bytes. The V out of where that comes from, that's what is it, 8 bytes or something like that. And now the signature, and the signature will usually be around I think around 70 bytes, 73 bytes. So it's sort of at about halfway in, or sorry, about a quarter of the way into the transaction, 70 bytes is for the signature. And then now that 70 bytes is no longer there, it's just a script hash, which is, I don't know how many bytes for the script hash, maybe 32 or something like that. So it's taking data out of the signature and moving it to the block, to the miner, to then build a Merkle tree of all those signatures and say through that script hash they match up to this particular transaction, which then means that a legacy node that's not running the SegWit rules, because they said SegWit's backwards compatible, so you could roll it out without it changing the rules. The legacy node, they see a transaction that has an empty script there, and they just have to trust then that the nodes, the SegWit nodes, are going to validate it correctly, and they're going to pass it back. So they kind of go, oh, well, look, I've got a whole block here. I wasn't able to validate the scripts on any of these. There's no signatures to them. That I'll just essentially trust those SegWit nodes did it correctly. And that's how it was declared to be backward compatible. But I think the suggestion was that by removing the signature data there, it made sort of more space available in the block itself when it's relayed to other people, because they didn't need to relay the data payload from the Coinbase transaction or something. So, and the transaction malleability is because when a transaction can be, it can be the same input or the same things, but if it's signed under a different SIG hash flag, I'm probably losing you here, but to sign the transaction, it says each transaction authorizes the spend of a previous one by signing a hash of the previous transaction and moving it on. That's the sort of the chain of actions. So when you do a digital signature, you don't just to sign something. What you do is you have a message, which is a particular set of data fields, and this is called the SIG hash pre-image. And it includes, the value, it includes the previous transaction, the locking script of the previous transaction, the sequence number, and some other fields that says, this is a snapshot of, all the things that we want fixed for this transaction in this before we broadcast it. Now we're hashing that down to 32 bytes, and then we use our private key and we sign that 32 bytes. And at the end of that signature, we put a SIG hash flag, which says, the particular data type that we used for the pre-image is this one. Some of those data types involve inputs and outputs both being part of the pre-image. Some of them only involve one input being part of the pre-image. Some of them only involve one output being part of the pre-image. So there's 6 different permutations there: SIG hash single, SIG hash none, SIG hash all. And that's specifying which outputs you want bound. And then there's a anyone can pay modifier, which says transactions can be added, or inputs can be added to this transaction container after this one without it invalidating the signature of those earlier ones. But so you can have a transaction, say, and if you're changing, it's got fixed inputs and outputs, but you're changing the fees, or you're changing what flag it was used to sign it, it's going to produce a different transaction ID. And in all the systems that they used for like referencing a transaction, the transaction ID would be the identifier. And if that's changing, they said that if it was mutable because you've still got the same inputs and that, but you've used a different flag, then it's risky because, someone could sort of insert that in. I don't think that risk is at all material or relevant for anyone.
You mean the risk, transaction malleability, that risk?
That it does anything, yeah. They blamed it, the Mt. Gox hack on transaction malleability, but there's not really any clear mechanism for how it happened. They just said they exploited transaction malleability, and that was the reason for the hack. Whether you believe the hack,
it was the narrative. It was the narrative, right?
The narrative
that pushed the SegWit proposal
was fixing transaction malleability. And to do so, we move the signatures out so that if you change any of those C.A.R.S values and you modify that, it will no longer mutate the transaction ID, and then we can safely track that transaction in the mempool, blah, blah, blah. So that was the claim that they made, and that was the justification for completely modifying the protocol and modifying the pipeline for transaction validation. And so that's what that's doing, is making a different, it's no longer a chain of digital signatures. So in the white paper, it's talked about an attack. So the longest proof of work, the longest honest chain of proof of work is the legitimate one, no matter what. But if a dishonest actor comes in and wants to attack the protocol, they are not free to modify thing and create random coins and such. All they can do is, under the rules of the protocol, is double spend their own coins or those that they've colluded with to double spend. If they said, we're going to make Bitcoin have 40 million coins, it's not Bitcoin anymore.
Yeah,
it's an attack. If they wanted to say it has a 1 minute block time, it's not Bitcoin anymore. It's a different system. Litecoin implemented a change to basically forked Bitcoin, changed a few parameters, and it is a different system. How small a difference is enough to justify it being called a different system? Is a breaking of the chain of digital signatures by which a coin is defined enough to justify the definition of a change to being a different protocol? So it's not just the might is right. It's not just the 51% is the one who says what Bitcoin is. If 51% take Bitcoin and make it have 100 million coins, make it have a 1 minute block time, why not? But 51% have said it, so it must be Bitcoin. The original idea of Bitcoin is now completely thrown out the window. No, it's irrelevant now because might is right. The masses have spoken, and I am just a delusional, contrarian. If I want to say no, the value proposition was the original protocol. I built around that. I built around that architecture. I built whole dependency workflows in my architecture to rely on a signature being at those specific bytes in the wire in the datagram. So that's where I think that we're sort of, it's very subtle.
It's subtle. It's very subtle. This first pillar is quite the crux of I think his claim here, which is protocol immutability. That I think. Let me read the second one, and maybe you can comment on it. Basically, it's economic consensus. So he says Bitcoin's authority rests with those who create blocks, miners, not hobbyist nodes. And so I think somewhere in this, because this was a thread, so he later on in the thread actually references how the definition of nodes is in, what is it, section 5 of the Bitcoin white paper. And like the guy was arguing with him, well, like, we don't agree on what a node is, and then he was like, so you don't agree with truth, or you don't care for the truth or anything like that. So he was like, basically just going back and forth. Like, if you can, this is why it's so important that we actually understand the terminology that we're using and the definitions of the words that we're using. And it's funny because like when I think of like legalese, this is the big trick with legalese, is that you could define a word and then change that definition of that word as applied in a different act, and that's the big crookedness
Sleight
of
of
the
hand.
system, sleight of hand
Yeah.
of the system. And it's very, sleight of hand is a perfect way of saying it. It's very sneaky. It's very sneaky. So he says here, miners, not hobbyist nodes. So the Bitcoin's authority rests with those who create blocks, miners, not hobbyist nodes. The network follows the chain with the most cumulative proof of work, the longest valid chain. That is the system's one and only consensus mechanism. So what comments would you have to say there, or is that just kind of like, okay, that's perfect,
No, because that's a really heart of the misinformation, and so I see even people, there's frameworks and that are out there that are attempting to use node count as a metric that confers some advantage to a build. How many nodes does the blockchain you're looking at have? Okay, we suggest an arbitrary amount over X is sufficiently decentralized, or assuming that
decentralized
the spectrum,
got it,
assuming that it's the spectrum of more is better, but it's not, because it depends on the architecture as well. So especially in a proof of stake system, that's even, an account based system, that's even more problematic. But in the system of steps to run the network, so there's 6 steps to run the network. Transactions are broadcast to all nodes when they're received. Frazzled to think them all in order. But if you're not doing those 6 steps, you are not running the network. That is the steps to run the network. The only way that a node can signal.
Do you remember where? Is it section 5? 6? Yeah, you got it. 6 steps. Yeah. Yeah. Do you want me to read through them, or you just want to reference the fact that there's 6 steps? I've got it. Yeah, I've got it here on the.
Can you chuck them in that chuck them in the document, and then I can just look at them.
Well, it's a PDF. Well, yeah. Let me see if I can copy this data.
Hang on, I'll just. Yeah,
it's a PDF. So they're small lines. I'll see if I can actually paste this into the doc here. So.
New transactions are broadcast to nodes. Each node collects new transactions into a block. So that's them building the Merkle tree. They're collecting the new transactions. They're hashing each of the transactions to generate their transaction ID, concatenatively hashing all the transactions to build a binary tree that goes up and expresses the summary of all those transactions by a Merkle root. And then they work on finding a difficult proof of work for its block. So they're consistently hashing that Merkle root in the header against the other values, the nonce. So if no transactions have come in, then the Merkle root won't have changed. And if no seconds have passed, then the timestamp won't have changed. But the other values will stay fixed of the version, the timestamp, the version, the difficulty. And so it's the nonce that is incremented to give you a new input, a new pre-image to hash to attempt to find a solution that has enough leading zeros in it. So that's what the nonce is. It's a number used once. If a new transaction is received, the Merkle root changes. If a new second ticks over, the timestamp changes, and so you can then hash that input. But if that's an invalid one, you need to increment the nonce again to make another attempt at the proof of work. So they're working on finding a difficult proof of work for its block, and a value that has a leading number of zeros, because that's probabilistically unlikely to be the output of a hash. When it finds a proof of work, it broadcasts the block to all nodes, so to all other parties. Nodes accept the block only if all transactions in it are valid and not already spent. So they're checking any of yours been double spent, blah, blah, blah. Nodes express their acceptance of the block by working on creating the next block in the chain. So The only way the nodes can express their acceptance is by referencing it in their next block. Other people would suggest that a node, a system that's fully synchronized with the blockchain that has all the records, that they can impact the network by adjusting their relay policies. So I will then, when a block comes in, I will do that up to section, 5. I'll do up to section 5 against my full blockchain and my UTXO set.
Okay.
And then my signaling my acceptance of it is whether or not I'll pass that on to other people. And that's suggested that that's like, it's cancel. It's saying that canceling is enough to make an impact, but it doesn't.
Well, okay.
All it's saying is I won't pass it to the next party, but the nodes, they need, the ones who are actually mining, they need to know the block from the other parties, because they don't want to be working on a next block that uses their, say someone proposed a block, but you weren't connected to it. So you just found a solution for a block and you're like, yeah, great, I won that. Now I'm going to reference mine as my next block and build on it. Everyone else in the network is referencing the other one that was found before you. So you're incentivized as a node to be connected to everyone and to get their stuff as quick as possible. You don't really care what people downstream are sharing to then, the edge users, blah, blah, blah. You only care about the game that you're playing, which is executing these 6 steps to give yourself the best chance of being validly awarded that Coinbase block supply and block subsidy and the transaction fees. The relaying is irrelevant, but that's the claim that has been made, that nodes, full nodes. So BTC will say we've got 1,000 full nodes. It doesn't. They're redundant. They don't do anything to consensus. They have no play in it. At worst, that means that the node on its outbound channels for the peers that are connected to it, it has to send out more copies of the block that it received to those 100,000 nodes. And that's a massive bandwidth drain, sending it all out to those guys, when it could actually be using those network ports for receiving transactions only from the relevant players.
So that's good. Let me read that third part of the 3 pillars. Okay, so now the last part is scalability through stability. So Bitcoin was designed to scale infinitely by allowing market-driven growth in block size and transaction volume. BSV maintains that design, a fixed protocol that enables open competition for transaction processing, not arbitrary limits imposed by developer committees. So what are your thoughts there, as far as that being the third pillar that defines Bitcoin?
Yeah, well, I think it's clear in Satoshi's writings that he intended the system to scale to significant volumes. He said it can already scale to Visa levels on today's hardwares. Bitcoin ends in data centers. People will then cherry pick a little detail where he said, using the blockchain for all data is not its intended use case. And he was sort of speaking about, BitDNS or something, I think, was it? Yeah, BitDNS or something like that being a useful, extension to the system, that not all data needs to go on chain. And that saying that it doesn't currently work very well for micropayments because the system wasn't bootstrapped. So there was no gating function on the low payments, and the block people hadn't really figured out their network peering. So if all of a sudden people started sending really small, tons and tons of really small amounts, it was going to put a stress on it. That doesn't mean that the system wasn't designed to scale. There's push data opcodes in there for 4 gigabytes. Why would you write that into the scripting language that it can handle 4 gigabyte data payloads if you couldn't do it? Why would you choose the Merkle tree as the data structure when you're only going to fit a couple hundred, transactions in a block? So there's certain things that betray the suggestion that Satoshi himself wanted it to be a small block, and he put the block size limit in there. I think he put the limit in there as a concession because people said, it's too risky, blah blah blah. So he introduced the block limit. He also said this is the strategy for removing the block limit is every 18 months double the block size, and until eventually you don't need the limit. Yeah. So the scalability through stability is essential as well, because when you make those changes to a system, then you can't, you've built an enterprise and you build an architecture that all relies on particular wire formats and such. Then you go and you change it, or if you've expected it to be a certain way and then there was policy changes. So do you know about like replaced by fee?
Yeah, that's another big one.
Yes,
there's quite a lot of changes, right? That little changes.
Well, that was one of the first changes, and what that meant is that the transaction, when it was sent to the nodes before it's been confirmed, you could bump it and add a big a transaction that spends it with a bigger fee, and that one would take precedence. But the node does it only if the transactions in it are valid and not already spent. So they only include the block in the first spend of an input. And an RBF is a second spend of the same input. And it means that you're no longer then able to operate under an SPV paradigm, because you've got the suggestion that a later spend of it will can supplant the previous one. And now if you're doing an SPV based workflow, you can no longer do that, and you're now constrained to wait for the block confirmations to have secure the validation of when your transaction's been or the confirmation of when your transaction's been included, which then limits everyone to that 10-minute block interval to even get the stamp of a confirmation, rather than SPV, which can be done in a few milliseconds. Totally. It means it's no longer useful as electronic cash, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that's why I really like this post, because it just really gets at the core of BTCs, and the BSV and the whole argument there. So he actually ends off by saying, and this is really key, this last part, where it's like the longest chain of valid signatures matters, but only when it adheres to the unmodified protocol. BTC abandoned that when it altered the rules. BSV continues them exactly as they were set in stone. And so that's how he ends up that post. So longest chain of valid signatures matters. So that's super, super key. In this whole claim that we'll start from the beginning, where he says BSV is Bitcoin, not because of marketing sentiments or ticker symbols, but because it adheres to the original system defined by the protocol itself. And yeah, so that was a wicked deep dive. Like that was really very valuable. I think the thing that was the most confusing was like when you just kind of like look at, again, going back to my first comment about proof of work on CoinDance shows. So maybe you could just close off with that one, going back to that one thing, which is like, you go to CoinDance, you see proof of work huge on the Bitcoin chart, right? The BTC chart. Yeah. But then all the other chains is like super, super small. So like, again, why is that not proof of work? Is it because of the protocol changes and the signature? The signature is no longer a chain of digital signatures. It's been modified.
It's no longer a chain of valid signatures. It's not. It's it's now a sort of a contraption of digital signatures, where the signatures are somewhere else, and you've got to do that. And what can happen as well is the miners can prune those Coinbase transactions, and once those coins have been spent and the signature data is no longer there, and the signature data is no longer being used in the creation of the transaction ID, so you've now severed the capacity to trace every coin back to when it was distributed onto the network through the Coinbase transaction. So that has implications, because at contract law and such, you can only really contract if you've got a digital signature. And if you don't have a chain of digital signatures, you've severed it. And so an enterprise that wants to, bind a workflow to SegWit-based Bitcoins, they're not getting chain of digital signatures. They're not able to accurately say that is now a contract and that it can have standing at law. So it undermines its capacity to be classified as a commodity because commodity needs to be a valid contract. So now it functions more as a different type of instrument, more like a promissory note or something.
Okay. So, it's just crazy because, obviously how big the market of BTC has grown to, what is it now? North of BTC itself is north of its market cap is north of 2 trillion, or is it 4 trillion?
Must be 2 trillion. Yeah, well, it's 120 odd a coin, and there's 20 million coins or something out there. So probably $2.4 trillion or something like that.
So just think about when you think about the consequence of what we just went through. And the fact that industries and technologies and businesses and governments and everything is mainstream now, right? And it's all quote unquote, I don't know if building on top of that is the correct word, but I just I'm seeing products come out. I've seen this one company that now is offering life insurance based on BTC, and it specifically specifies BTC as the underlying. Okay, are you familiar with life?
Something like that.
Yeah. Well, you're familiar with whole life insurance. That product, whole life insurance. It's just basically, well, it's there's term life insurance, which a lot of people are familiar with, which is, I'm gonna buy whatever amount every month. Usually it's a pretty cheap amount, but for a certain specific term, 5 years, 10 years, let's say 20 years, you're gonna have coverage so that if you do pass away, you get this quote unquote. What's the actual phrase of it? It's basically that is the actual life insurance. It's like a payout. It's a big payout. Let's say it's $1 million. Okay. So that you get it for a term. Now the opposite of that product is a thing called whole life insurance, which means it's more expensive, but you get that thing. You get that payout for your entire life. It's not for a specific term. So, anyways. That is traditionally derived on dollars. That's usually, how they calculate the value of that policy is derived on dollars. But then I seen this company come out and they are starting to offer this whole life product that is based and derived on BTC. And then you think about the implications that means for people putting, 20 years of money into this policy. And what happens if BTC I don't know, man, just think about that question. What happens if what we're talking about is in fact true? And what is the consequence of that for BTC? What is the impact of that for BTC? The fact that it is a different, does it matter? Is it just another blockchain and it's completely fine and it's completely secure? Is there any massive risk involved with the market itself for the fact that BTC is not Bitcoin, or does that not even matter? And the fact that the whole mainstream public, the fact that they think that BTC is Bitcoin, it really doesn't matter because it's functioning. It's a blockchain. It's functioning. It just happens to be functioning under a different. It's not. Is
it functioning? It's doing its thing, but it's it barely functions. But anyway, I'll try and answer what I think is the question. So in the US, when I said it has implications for it being able to be classified as a commodity, people may say, but the SEC declared Bitcoin a commodity, but the SEC, it's not really the SEC's remit to make declarations of what is and isn't a commodity. It would be more so under, I think, the CFTC. And now with the Clarity Act, which is passed one house, but it hasn't passed both houses, I think, or a draft has been through. It makes certain declarations as to what constitutes a mature blockchain. And a mature blockchain needs to not have any central group of developers that are modifying the protocol, that are changing it. So if you look at BTC, it's had several changes in the last few years. That it not only did it modify it with SegWit, but it also modified it with Taproot, and Taproot created another data structure that then people came and exploited that data structure to embed JPEG payloads, and that caused them all to go and now there's the whole argument as to how do we undo the damage that we created by making other modifications to the protocol. And so their roadmap is basically like, how can we fix the damages that came through us introducing Taproot? And we've got to change these few other things, X, Y, and Z. And that's going to be continuing to go over the next 10 years till we really get this protocol fixed. So that, under those definitions in the Clarity Act, it would not be a mature protocol. It would not be a mature blockchain. And then the maturity is going to be a determinant into, because the blockchains, the onus for whether or not they can be declared a commodity is going to be put on the blockchains to advance that argument themselves that they are. Okay. And they'll need to demonstrate how they can satisfy particular conditions, which would be their maturity level, which would be no entity controlling more than 20% of the underlying asset, certain things like that. So the risk, when you said about these companies that are basing things on BTC, I don't know what the market, I don't know how long the market can continue to remain pretty irrational and paying ridiculous sums of money for only the idea that it is digitally scarce and that money is unseizable. But if there's any asset recovery process that gets demonstrated to be actually able to be executed on a blockchain, that value proposition of censorship, resistance is really wounded. Like that's really challenged. If you can reassign coins that are the proceeds of crime, or that are sanctioned funds and distribute them to another output, and that's demonstratable on one other blockchain, then if people under oath say it can't be done on their blockchain, but it can be done, it's just software, that has implications for them. Are they committing perjury when they're saying that it cannot be done? Are they in contempt when they say, I won't introduce the software that does it? So if a precedent gets set that coins can be reassigned, which they technically can, then the censorship resistance is smashed. And then the digital scarcity, if they don't, when he talks about economic consensus, but when he talk about as well, like the economics of the equation, like if the coin goes down on BTC and they're still mining at whatever petahash or something, the overheads are so massive that they can't afford the income that comes in just through the few transaction fees from 7 transactions a second is going to be inadequate to keep the miners incentivized to stay on that chain. The subsidies dwindling. So there is discussion. Some of them are introducing the idea that they need to inflate the coin supply to pay the miners some kind of subsidy in perpetuity, rather than simply just letting more people use it and having an economy of scale around the transaction fees. So there's several like sort of risk dimensions that BTC would is exposed to.
Yeah, they have a few different attack vectors, if you will. But that in itself, like the idea of changing the what did you say, the total supply, right?
Yeah.
That's basically what you would be doing, right? By adding some inflation. So like that is a clear protocol change. That is a clear like like this. It's not obvious. It's not sleight of hand. It's absolutely like I think I've heard other influencers in the space say that they would rather die than change this particular component of the protocol, or they would rather fork than do that because it's so critical. It's not sleight of hand. It's not. It's like changing it. You know, I don't know, man. It's just, so if they did that, it would be very clear that they literally cannot, you know, at least maintain that name. They would have to change the name, which I don't know. Yeah,
it depends on how much collusion they can do with the market, you know, because it's who will keep the illusion alive that it is it regardless. You know, people don't put that much effort into their you know, their study, the due diligence before they're buying stuff, especially at this stage in the game when you know, it's no longer the early investors or whatever, the you know, people that are ahead of the crowd that are buying Bitcoin now. It's you know, it's retail. It's very much retail. It's mainstream. And generally, the people that I talk to about it that are the most actively sort of buying it are the least informed. You know, they can't define how mining works. They can't define what a protocol is. What are the steps that a node takes to run the network? They're just buying the marketing. And when one entity controls 95% of the marketing, the news, the media around crypto, it's hard for the information to get out there. So it's up to, you know, for people to do their due diligence to understand these things. But that's why it's important. That's, you know, the whole essence of this podcast is to be able to cut through and sort of give a bit more appreciation to these nuances and see the implications of choosing one side in favor of the other, or what are the downstream effects. So yeah, and that protocol stability, like there's, as far as I can tell, there is no other blockchain out there that is even suggesting that the protocol should be ossified now and set in stone. That they are all saying there's still a roadmap ahead of us. They're all still saying, no, we need to be able to, you know, there's always a central group that's making these decisions. And SEC Commissioner Hester Pierce, she said, you know, a system is decentralized only if there's not a group that can unilaterally change the rules and the protocol. Like, it's been said several times, but the fallout, if they came out and said, BTC is not Bitcoin, BSV is Bitcoin, and there's $2 trillion in there, and then there's a $4 trillion crypto market cap, like that's catastrophic rearrangement of the entire market, and it's not able to. I can't imagine that it's able to be done by anyone, or anyone's going to favor taking that kind of a wrecking ball, even to a complete, you know, delusion. So the Clarity Act really forces the people in the market to come and make their own claims as to whether or not they can be considered a valid, a mature blockchain, whether or not they can be considered a commodity, and it will remove the SEC's capacity to make these declarations. So I think that's why the SEC is even going on a bit of a bender and you know, passing all these ETFs for other systems, saying, oh yeah, that's a commodity, that's a commodity, that's a commodity, because it's actually like doesn't have that scope. But I guess it's maybe people, I don't know how that system works, but it appears to be broken when it's passing XRP as a commodity, saying that it's, you know, it's not a central group of people that are primarily interested in the appreciation of the underlying asset. That claim is dubious.
Yeah, that's insane. Yeah, I'm surprised, man. We covered a lot of ground here. Like, I was just surprised we got into like the Clarity Act and the Bitcoin white paper. we covered a lot of ground. So what would you say, like, for like, you know, closing this out, what would you say would be one thing that you would want people to, I don't know, think about or consider when, let's say, looking at a project or looking at building on a project? Let's just say investing or building on a project. Let's ignore the investing part. Like, we won't talk about financial advice here, but
Yeah,
so let's
yeah,
just
no,
talk
no,
about
no.
like building on a project. What would you want
Well,
people
I think
to? Yeah, go ahead.
I think the core, what emerged as the core focus of this episode was protocol mutability, and that's a massive like dimension that I've you know got in my risk assessment frameworks that I can use for people. Is to what extent is the system that you're building on changing underneath you? When was the last time the protocol was changed? Who has the authority to change the protocol? You really need to understand that mechanism and what are the variables there, because the only blockchain that I've seen that would make a declaration that it is intended to be set in stone is BSV. But if you're looking at other ones, like some of them are changing every 6 months, and you're trying to build, an architecture that has all these dependencies on the capacity to write transactions, and expect that some of the banking software is 20, 30 years old. You want to build something that lasts for 20 to 30 years, and every 6 months they're introducing a new signature scheme, or deciding like, oh yeah, we need to make this, bake anonymity into the protocol. So that is a huge risk, is protocol mutability. And so looking at how often the code base changes, who has the decisions to make changes to the code base, how do they do it, where was their authority vested in them to make those decisions? Were they just self-appointed from the ICO when the coin came into existence? Are they a group of consortium of companies that have chucked in a bunch of money? Because when you get to that point where you've looked into who can change the protocol, then you say, okay, so there's a core group here. How is this core group funded? Oh, they got a whole bunch of money. Oh, so they're now, because it's like they're collectively invested in the success of the project, and they want the value to appreciate, they're like loss leading, and they're throwing out grants, and they're throwing out spending money on marketing, and they're spending money on all these other things to make their platform come into existence. So it's probably protocol mutability is kind of the clue that when you go and look who can mutate the protocol, you'll find a group of people that wield power, and they have with that power, they have the capacity to completely undermine the entire build that you're committing to, making use of this technology.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point. What I would say as a clue, using your words, is look for the the consensus of the project, right? Like, what is it? Is it proof of work, or is it something else, like proof of stake, for example, or something else, delegated stake? And you could eliminate quite a bit of stuff just by asking that one question, like, what is the consensus of the project, if it uses proof of work or not? And you could land quite close to being in a position of stability, and not falling, as you say, into the graveyard of crypto projects.
Yeah. I think that's on point there. I've written some articles about that, and essentially that proof of stake is just a continuation of the consortium governance model. Whereas, when how is the authority vested in all the validators who are saying that they're staking something in this equation? And if it's just an economic equation, but then certain people disproportionately had a whole bunch of coins from the pre-sale or the ICO or the pre-mine or whatever, now they've disproportionately got a sway in the network validation. So as I could keep saying it, I could give you the narrow path with the couple of variables that you need to, the tick boxes to tick to pretty much guarantee success. But it's going to seem just a bit preposterous that it is can only be one way. So hopefully, as we take part in this journey, we're sort of showing you the substance behind why it may only be the case that one particular architecture will achieve enterprise scale and meet the demands to underwrite Web3 and a blockchain economy worldwide.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that'll be the obvious conclusion after a number of episodes that we roll out.
Yeah, hope so.
Yeah. So what I think that's a great first episode. Maybe if you're watching this and you've liked, definitely subscribe to the podcast. Comment below if you are if you have any ideas of what you would want us to cover in terms of claims that you've seen and you want broken down. I think that'd be good to get that user feedback. But I think that's pretty much all for this episode. Do you want to close us out, Todd?
Yeah, no, I've enjoyed it. It's definitely a good spot to stop, or otherwise we're going to open up a whole nother silo of worms rather than just a can of worms. Yeah. So there's a lot to cover, and we've got plenty of material ahead of us. But I guess we've been trying to sort of brainstorm a few sign-off phrases, and I really liked the idea of from Thessalonians 5:21 with prove all things and hold fast that which is good. So that's really, we're not in this podcast to tear anyone down or to make diminish things that people are building, but we just want to make sure that we're testing all things and finding whether or not they're valid. And then if you can take that validity to market, we want you all to have a better chance of succeeding and building meaningful solutions, because I want to see this technology broadly adopted everywhere, and I want to see it done in a way that is aligned with good rather than aligned with recreating the legacy patterns that sort of perpetuate domination and control and surveillance and such.
Absolutely. Well, that's a perfect quote to close on. So awesome. All right. We'll see you guys all in the next episode. Hopefully we'll be doing this on a regular basis, on a weekly. That's the goal. Until next time, we'll see you guys all later. Take care.
Bye.